You've heard about the essential qualities of iodine when it comes to your well-being, and you've read the opinions of top experts regarding this good member of the halogen family. Still, reports indicate that iodine is absent in sufficient amounts from the daily lives of countless people worldwide. Now, our extra-strength new nascent iodine formula is here, Survival Shield X2, leading the way into the next generation of super high-quality nascent iodine. InfoWars Life Survival Shield X2 is derived from 200+ million-year-old salt solutions found more than 7,000 feet below the Earth's surface. The result is a unique nascent iodine that is both concentrated and free of unwanted additives, genetically modified ingredients, and completely vegan. We even pre-screen our Survival Shield X2 iodine for radiation. Pure, clean, and sourced from deep within the Earth, X2 nascent iodine is available exclusively at InfoWarsLife.com, InfoWarsStore.com, or call 1-888-253-3139.
The government's Department of Homeland Security is buying up loads of ammo. At the same time, they're restricting civilians' rights to own and purchase firearms. Can you put two and two together? Infidel Body Armor can stop every round, including hollow points and .308 sniper rounds, is reasonably priced and fully legal. But for how long? Go to InfidelBodyArmor.com, spelled INFIDEL bodyarmor.com. Infidel Body Armor just won't quit.
When cells become toxic, they die early and aging sets in. No one has put together a formula that focuses directly on brain health, nerve growth factors, and optimizing your cellular energy at the same time. Just one of the key compounds, BioPQQ, is backed by major clinical studies. You want the best that's out there at the lowest price anywhere? We now have the synergistic solution. Secure your DNA force today at InfoWarsLife.com or call toll-free 888-253-3139.
Another major health threat, this one in Toledo, Ohio, where everybody in the entire city has been told not to drink the water.
Ohio's governor declaring a state of emergency.
Did you know that the average person uses about 80 to 100 gallons of water at home every single day? If there's a water emergency, will you be prepared?
Panicked residents forming long lines throughout the day.
We're here at a supermarket in Toledo. You can see the shelves empty where water once was.
To stay safe and healthy during a crisis, you must have access to safe, clean water. Water which will not be available at your local grocery store.
There's a mad dash on right now to stock up on supplies.
The ProPure Pro 1 G2.0 water filtration system is a must-have for every modern, independently minded household. Protect your family's safety during an emergency. Go to InfoWarsStore.com today to purchase your ProPure Pro 1 G2.0 water filtration system or call 1-888-253-3139.
We now take you live to the Central Texas Command Center in the heart of the resistance.
We really are being culturally colonized. The private Federal Reserve is deindustrializing the nation. We really are an occupied country. And only realizing that do we ever have a chance to begin to retake the nation via the states. But as Joel Skousen has said, globalism is so evil, so scientific, so manipulative that our weakness is its strength. Our decadence is its power. And I'm certainly not on some high horse here. And so everyone should start thinking about ways to survive in a collapsed society. And we're going to talk about that coming up with Joel. We're not being doom and gloom here. It's hard to sustain a civilization this complex to begin with. That's not debated by any anthropologist, sociologist, social planner, city planner, economist. The more complex, the more fragile. You add to that the artificiality of Agenda 21 and artificial scarcity to consolidate power by these groups. The West not having 2.1 children, that will cause a collapse in and of itself. You've got to have 2.1 people for every 2 people that are already alive to just have Social Security and the social safety network work. They're not going that direction. They're going into a command, in their words, command destruction model. And the way they've engineered society, I see it as a bioweapon release down the road or them allowing something to develop and then opening the door, a 12-monkey scenario, as one of the main tools they might pull instead of a nuclear war with Russia. Because all the preparations are being made for that. So, Joel, if you would, go through your view, looking at the U.S. first, but then other parts of the world, of what would happen if real airborne Ebola went viral in West Africa, let's say 3 years from now. Or if this was to mutate and go airborne, what you would expect to see. Because we're already seeing panicking with only 2 people in the U.S. known to have had it. 1 dead, 1 alive. What would happen if thousands started to get it? What would happen if it went airborne? And what would someone who was prepared do versus someone who wasn't prepared?
Well, the first thing that would happen, you would have mandatory quarantine happening. And even before a mass vaccination, it takes them a certain time to gear up. If, in fact, they show up with millions of doses of vaccine in advance, then you know it was planned. There has to be a period of time for them to develop a vaccine and to go forward with it if it's real. But in any case, mass quarantine is the major problem that you face because as this sheriff's deputy, he came in down with some flu symptoms and he got labeled potentially Ebola and put into quarantine. Had this happen in a mass quarantine situation where a lot of people are coming down sick with it, and you happen to have the flu or a cold or fever or something and get tagged and put into a mass quarantine, you're going to get the Ebola because you're put into a quarantine with other people. And just like the Superdome during Katrina, you're not going to have the kind of facilities. I don't care what the CDC says. You can't have extremely controlled medical protocols in mass quarantine situations. It simply overwhelms the medical system. Even in Liberia, you know, they're already out of hospital beds. And how do you build more facilities to handle the exponential increase in clients? So what happens is you have to carefully watch this. At the first hint going to be mass quarantine, you have to get out of Dodge. You have to then implement your strategic relocation plans to get out into the rural areas. It's going to be in the urban areas where those mass quarantines occur. You just don't want to have the risk of being in one of those dragnets. Once it starts to go airborne, it will rapidly multiply. They're talking now about 2 to 1. Meaning it's doubling. For every patient infects 2 more. Well, that's really quite a slow infection rate compared to the Spanish flu when it was 10 and sometimes 20 to 1. Now, it never gets to the whole population. At least 30% of the population, at least from historical statistics, has a tough enough immune system that they won't get sick, even and didn't during the Spanish flu, as tough as that was, and probably won't get Ebola, even if it's airborne. The airborne strains are always a little bit weaker than the contact strains. So even though they spread more rapidly, they're a little bit weaker form, and so probably going to be more survivable. But clearly, you don't want to get into the arms of government. You don't want to go into a FEMA camp. You don't want to go into a medical camp or quarantine if you can afford it. Now, if you do get Ebola, real Ebola, you want to do self-quarantine, and you keep yourself away from your family. You have to have provisions for that as well so that you don't infect other people.
Joel, though, entertain me for a moment. What would an airborne outbreak look like? What would that do to this civilization?
It depends on how fast it replicates itself among other people. If it's a thing where one student comes in and all of a sudden half of the school is down with the illness, and then the next week the rest of the school is down with the illness, that's going to be mass panic. I mean, people are going to be leaving the city in droves. They're going to be, without any preparations, they're going to be doing a strategic relocation. And that's what would happen in a mass panic situation. It would be the same thing happening as an EMP strike when you don't have electricity or food services. It could be devastating. Now, typically, it doesn't happen that rapidly. Typically, it grows slowly enough. In other words, it starts with 1 in 3, then 1 in 5, and then 1 in 10 in terms of multiples. And at the point it gets to 1 in 10, the government is starting to put in mass quarantines and camps and other things I think they'd love to do that, to have the excuse to build camps that can be used for other purposes in some future time once the infection wears itself out. But it's really impossible to tell, except to say, according to the speed, I predict that it would at least get to the point where the government would do mass people control and containment control strategies, which is devastating to your liberty, devastating to your rights. And that does give you time, however, to see the handwriting on the wall and say, I'm getting out of town now before I get stuck in one of those quarantine camps.
Well, my gut, my instinct is, and I do have a little place out in the country, but is to get even further out in the country. But I'm here in Austin, Texas, trying to put on a defense of what's left of freedom. But at the same time, we need to divide our energies into fighting to restore the republic, fighting to warn people worldwide, but also preparing ourselves. Because if folks that are aware of this information aren't somewhat prepared, then we're not going to be around at the end of this when the UN and others come in and try to take control of society. But if we do have groups spread out in the countryside and other areas, those will end up being areas of stability into the future, as you've said, Joel.
Well, that's right, Alex. You know, I've spoken to a lot of people around the nation like you have, and the thing that worries me about our own constitutional conservative group is you get people talking about the positivism. We're going to restore the Constitution. We're going to beat this. When we get rid of Obama, we're going to win this. And this I'm going to win mentality is antithetical towards preparation. They just aren't preparing. One of the most ill-prepared groups are those that think that they're going to win this battle politically. Now, I'm not saying whether or not we are. I think it's, frankly, given the power of the globalist and the conspiracy that I see, I think it's unlikely that we're going to win as a nation. Doesn't mean that Lord won't provide pockets of liberty for us, but we've got to survive the nuclear war that's coming. We've got to survive the pandemic that's coming. If you haven't prepared well in advance, these are preparations that you can't just do on the fly. It takes significant preparation in advance to do that. And like you, I'm afraid, or as I say, as we prepare to fight for our liberty, we still have to prepare. You know, the kind of preparations that you and I have to do, Alex, in order to maintain a lifeline. I'm preparing to be able, through electronic or even radio means, to transmit my writing a brief if I have to go into seclusion, and have people who can then transmit that. And I think everyone who's got a mission in life or is a target in life, like you and I are, have to prepare to be able to keep being effective even when you're kind of having to be underground.
I want to shift gears before we look at geopolitical issues into further afield, not just the global crime syndicate, the globalists, the Anglo-American system, but the Russian power bloc, the Chinese power bloc, and some of the other sub-crime syndicates out there. Or you look at 300 million Chinese, that's a giant laboratory right there of different mutations. We could see something naturally, obviously, mutate, and I don't know how the establishment would deal with that. But who else is out there that you're worried about? Who else might want to create some type of bioweapon?
Well, I really think there are only three major predator centers. There's the Anglo-American globalists, there's Russia, and there's China, and Russia and China are temporarily aligned in order to take down the West, and then they intend to tackle each other. They all have very active bioweapon programs. None of them seem to be experimenting on their own people, however. This seems to be only endemic to the unprincipled Anglo-American globalists. And, of course, they pick on the Filipinos, as they did with that abortifacient doped vaccine that they gave women in the Philippines. They pick on the Africans. They feel those are dispensable. And so I think that's still preliminary. The fact that they are picking on these, what they consider dispensable, low-life populations, indicates that they aren't yet ready to attack, at least pandemic-wise, the major ones. But I really don't see any other predator forms out there. I don't think, in fact, even the mafia, these small criminal elements, most of those have some ties to governments that keep them in power.
Sure, that's what Brzezinski's written a bunch of books on that they really allow the big syndicates to operate and then launder their money through the big banks. That's even come out in Bloomberg. hundreds of billions a year being laundered through Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and the like. Let me bring up this issue. How do you describe the most dominant power